Notice that God has been trying to get me to speak a little bit more and more. And I'm excited about it because I got something to say. Is that it? Are you guys going to be with me today? I won't be long. I'm pretty sure I won't be. But I wanted to start off a little bit with something that I think a lot of us have experienced. Has anyone ever received a spam email? And if you don't know what spam is, I'm going to take a few minutes to explain what spam is. Spam is, it's really when you look at your inbox, you're almost saying, I don't really know. It's one of those inboxes that you get a whole bunch of emails, but it's really from companies that you signed up for, right? So like a good example this weekend is Black Friday. A lot of you guys, you go to the retail stores and they say, oh, you want this shirt? Okay, you can have $10 off. Just sign your name here, get a credit card. And all of a sudden, by the time you get in your car, you got 10 emails, right? 10 emails, and that's what you would consider spam, which means that they're always just sending you emails. But remember, it's something that you signed up for. Does that make sense? Also now, T-Mobile has gotten really good. Verizon has gotten really good. When they call you, what comes up? Huh? Scam likely, right? Scam likely has you guys missing very important calls. Let's just say that. I remember, I got a good joke, because I remember I was out of town, and I ordered an Uber, and I could not find the Uber. But then the phone call that kept on coming up was Scam likely. I'm hanging up on Scam likely. I'm like, let me finally pick up Scam Likely. And Scam Likely says, this is your Uber. I'm like, oh. So there's a chance that some of those scam calls are very important cousins that are calling you, by the way. So I just thought about that in terms of when you're receiving a scam email. But interesting enough, I received one time this pretty interesting email. Because not only you get a spam email, but those spam emails could also be a scam email. Does that make sense? Which means that spam is you went to Marshall's this weekend and Marshall sends you an email and says, hey, do you want 10% off on your next purchase? That's spam. Does that make sense? A scam is when it's not Marshall's, right? It's not your Wells Fargo, but it's an email that looks like your Wells Fargo. Does that make sense? When you look at it, it looks like it says Wells Fargo at the top. It says this is your account is suspended, and all of a sudden, but the goal of that email is to get you to click. Does everybody know what happens when you click that email? No. Huh? You said no? If you click the email, there's a possibility that you can get what they call a virus on your computer. Right? But I got an interesting email. I thought it was very interesting. It was a long message. And the email says, we know what you did. I was like, uh-oh. It also says that it's going to share it with my family and friends if I don't send them $10,000. You got, okay, see, we got a witness. And I said, oh my, it says, it knows what I did. Let me tell you something. That's a testimony right there, because when you're innocent, can't nobody tell you anything, right? Does it make sense? When you're innocent, can't nobody get you on nothing. Because once I read it, I was like, I think I laughed and I sent a screenshot to my wife. I started laughing. But if I was guilty, I would be what? I would be scared. Because believe it or not, they get a lot of people in what they call ransomware, right? Which means that they know you did something and they're willing to share it for a certain amount of money. They said they won't share it. You see what I'm saying? But thank God for innocence. Does that make sense? And this is where we start our message. Is that fair? Let us read Matthew 13:24. Let's read it together. Let me know when you've gotten to Matthew 13, verse 24. And I think it's going to be a very interesting message, I believe. We should have it on the projector here. Matthew 13, 24 through 29. We're going to read that first. Does everybody have it? You can have it digitally. We can have it. Matthew 13, verse 24 through 29. We're going to read that first. And then after that, we're going to read Matthew 13, 36 through 42. So Matthew 13, we see that all of a sudden, God is giving lots of parables, lots of stories. Christ is a storyteller, right? I think I have a lot of similarities to Christ because I like to tell a good story, and I like to hear a good juicy story one too, right? Am I the only one? I look, everybody. So Matthew 13 is full of parables. It's full of God trying to describe things that are supernatural in the natural. Does that make sense? You know how sometimes you can't really explain somebody the way it is, so that you have to give it like a metaphor? And that's what Christ is doing. He's trying to explain something, but he can't just give it to you the way it is. Let's read Matthew 13, verse 24. It said, Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in the field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where did these weeds come from? And an enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. Does everybody get it so far? Amen. So this is very interesting, I'm going to say that right now, is that if you hear the story, there's a field, right? And a farmer is planting his good seed, right? So while he's planting good seed, the enemy is coming through and planting what? Bad seed, right? Almost like what they would call a poison in the midst of the good. Does that make sense? And then he says, but the thing about it is you have to understand what's very interesting is that the enemy understands that when it first begins to grow, the wheat and the tare, when you hear the tare, that means a weed, the wheat and the tare, they look exactly alike. Does that make sense? They look exactly alike. Now you have to ask yourself, this is the first tool. One of the biggest tools that the enemy uses is called deception. He looks to deceive. Does that make sense what I'm saying there so far? In other words, when they first grow out of the ground, they both look exactly alike. You cannot tell the difference. The only time you have to understand is that the only reason I was able to understand that scam email was fake is because I've seen what? I've seen the real one. I know what a real email looks like. Does that make sense? I know when it's really from Wells Fargo, right? Because sometimes when it's fake, they add an S, Wells Fargo's. You're like, oh, that's not Wells Fargo. It's similar, but it's not the same. You see what I'm saying? But you know what I love about this particular passage? And it's not many parables, but Christ decides that he's going to explain this parable. Does that make sense? So it makes it a lot easier. He decides he's going to explain it. Let's go to Matthew 13, 36 through 42. Matthew 13, 36 through 42. We have to get through this so you can understand the rest. And it says Matthew 13, 36 through 42. It says the parable of the weeds explained. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field." He answered, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are for the people of the evil one. And the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. The weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out all of his kingdom, everything that causes sin, and all who does evil. They will throw them into a blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh, okay. Now we get into the message. You guys are excited? Tell the person next to you, I'm excited to hear this. You got to be truthful, though, at least. You know the first thing that I thought was interesting, and this has nothing to do with the message, but I thought it was interesting. When the crowd left and went into the house, right? Can you imagine, you've been a part of that, right? When you're part of these meetings at work, or your parents said something at home, or your wife said something, and then they're getting very deep, right? Lots of deep conversation happening. And then all of a sudden, the crowd left, the siblings left, and then the disciples was like, Jesus, come here for a second. What were you talking about up there? So in order sometimes for you to be able to hear from God, you got to push away the crowd. You ever heard that before? You got to push away the crowd so you can at least understand what Christ is trying to say. And then all of a sudden, Christ gets to the explaining. He gets to the explaining, which I thought was just so interesting. He says right here, he says, the field is the world. Remember that. The field is not the church. The field is the world. Do you understand that? The field is not the church. The field is the world. Understand that the world is full of what? Good and bad. When we sit in church, we shouldn't have that. Does that make sense? Yes. There shouldn't be good and evil in church. But in the world, that should be expected. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Now, what I thought was so interesting, right? And it says the enemy and then all of a sudden, right? The question comes up. And it says, do you want us to pull them out? I thought it was so interesting, right? Because do you understand that all of us in this room, we live with good and evil, right? And all of a sudden, a question is asked, and it says, do you want us to pull them out, right? Because I think a lot of us, we sitting here like, okay, well, in order for us to be believers, we have to position ourselves next to other good people. We got to position ourselves over here next to people who are saved, and next to people who are singing, and next to people who are holy. And the thing about it is, when we're all growing together, we can't tell the difference. Just because you're singing, just because you're sitting here, doesn't mean what? You're any better than the person who's not. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So the question is asked, do you want us to pull it out? Where's my illustration real quick? Hopefully nobody shook it up. Oh, Sammy, thank you. He had a birthday this week. Come on, let's give a hand clap. Come on now. Happy birthday here. So let's just say this is the weed. Can everybody understand my illustration? This is the tare, right? This is the tare. This is the weed. This is the wheat. This is the weed. This is the good. This is the bad. I need one volunteer. Come on up. Oh, wow. Too many of you. Don't rush. One volunteer. Oh, Gene, there you go. We got one. Somebody coming up. He got to come all the way from the back. It's all good. It's a conversation today. This is the good, right? The bad. Thank you. Somebody's paying attention. This is the bad. This is the good. This is the tare. This is the wheat. The verse says, should we pull them? The answer is what? No, because there is going to be a day for us to pull it out. It says, should we pull it out? All right, this is the bad. We have a tendency to try to pull out the bad, right? We have a tendency. We have a tendency to try to, oh, this person is bad. No, this person's good. That's our judgmental self. Does that make sense what I'm saying? We have that tendency. God is like, listen, when it's time to judge, that's not on you. That's on. God does give us things to do, but this one he doesn't. He does not ask us to do this. Go ahead and, Gene, pull out that. Whoa, Hold on. Hold on. Thank you, G, for destroying my wheat. While Gene was pulling out the bad, he messed up the good. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? While we're busy trying to figure out and how to pull certain people and do certain things and judge this, you're messing. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? You're not allowing God to do what he needs to do with the good because you're trying to figure certain things out with the bad. You understand what I mean? Listen here. This is so interesting. The one reason that the wheat pulled out with the tare is because at the roots they're together. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? At the roots, you got to understand, we live in a world that we're going to lunch with our coworkers. Our children are in class with it doesn't. At the root, they're together. There's going to be a difference. You have to understand, how do we determine the difference between the wheat and the tare? There's going to be a time to determine the difference. How do you determine the difference? The way that you can tell the difference between the wheat and the tare, you got to let them grow up. Once they begin to grow, you're going to start seeing fruit from the good. You see what I'm trying to tell you? You begin to see fruit from the good. Now, you're like, God, Lord, allow me to be that wheat, right? That's the question. That's where everybody has to leave in this room and says, God, allow me to be that wheat. Now, how do we become wheat? We have to continue to be watered. Does that make sense? We have to continue to be watered. And this is the thing here. This is the thing here. Let me explain something to you. Let's go to James chapter 5, 7 through 9. James chapter 5, 7 through 9. Let's get that ready. So, let me tell you something. You would assume that God is a funny God. God, if you want me to be saved, why don't you just put me around other saved people, right? Why don't you just put me around a lot of holy people all the time? That's what I would say, God. Like, just leave me in church for 7 days of the week. We're all singing. We're all worshiping. It should be fine here, right? Well, then how are others going to come to know who Christ is? How are others going to see the love of Christ if we only are in church? You see what I'm saying? So God sends us out into the world, but he says, don't be of the world, be in the world. You see what I'm trying to tell you? That's the challenge us believers have. Because when we step out into the world, it kind of looks good. The things of the world looks good, but he says, you're going to be in the world, but you shouldn't be what? Of the world. Matter of fact, the things of the world you should hate. Come on now. We got some Bible scholars back there. The things of the world we should hate, because the things of the world are what? Destroying your fruit. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? The things of the world are weeds and tares in your life, and they're destroying your fruit. Because the Bible tells us, how do we tell somebody's a believer? We tell somebody's a believer by their what? Huh. Do you understand when we say by their fruit, what does that mean? Because if you have an apple tree in your backyard, right? And your apple tree never gives apples, what is that? What is it? Huh? It's worthless, right? Matter of fact, it's just taking up space, and it deserves to be what? Cut up and used for firewood. It's useless. Does that make sense what I'm saying? It's useless. This is what God is trying to explain to us right here. He's trying to sit there and explain to us that if we are to produce good fruit, that means there are things inside of us that have to be given to others. Because the first thing that happens with fruit is that you have to share fruit, right? Listen to this. We're going to read James chapter 5, 7 through 9. There you go. It says, because we have another tendency to do something else. It says, be patient then, brothers and sisters. James chapter 5, 7 through 9. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Let me tell you something. We got this tendency, our minds, all of us in this room, we do the same thing. We sit there and we're like, whoa, look at them. They don't know God, but their life looks good. They got money. They got the car. They got the clothes. So we have a tendency to start looking at other people, right, as our reflection to God. And God says no, right? Because we start looking at them, that is what they call a distraction. You see what I'm saying? Remember I told you that the enemy, the first thing that he came up with was what? His first role is what? To do what? Deceive, right? That's one of the tools that he has, is to what? Deceive. If anybody knows the story of Adam and Eve, he comes through and he talks to Adam and he what? And Eve, and he what? He deceives them. He comes through as a tear and he deceives them. Then he comes, right? And he sits there and he puts us in a world with so much distractions, right? And then we begin to question God. There's something called, there's a study and an understanding called common grace, right? Common grace means that while we're on this earth, right? While we're on this earth, remember I told you, God said he's going to let us grow up with people who are non-believers. While we're on this earth, it's called common grace. Common grace means that just like someone who does not believe in God gets rain, right? The believer, we get access to what? To rain. Does that make sense? The same good that we have access to on this earth, the unbeliever has access to on this earth, right? So sometimes we have a tendency to look at somebody, right? We might look at, that's what they always tell you, you might look at social media, you might look like Instagram, and understand that you're looking at a highlight reel of somebody's life, right? You're looking at the best. The person's not turning on their camera when they don't look the best. Does that make sense? But when we look at Instagram, we're like, oh, look how they look. Oh my gosh, this person wakes up beautiful. By the time they turn on their camera, they wake up with stacks of money. They wake up with the car. No. They set all of that up and they say, listen, how's my face look? How do I look? Okay, now turn on the camera. Right? Is the car, you have to understand when you're trying to mimic something like that, that is a highlight reel. That's not real. A highlight reel, R-E-E-L, not a, does that make sense? Like, in other words, it's somebody who's portraying something. That doesn't mean that we're supposed to look at it and say, oh, we want to be like that. We got to be very careful, right? Now, we also, it says, because as a church and as believers, we've been saying Christ is coming back, Christ is coming, Christ is coming. And people are like, listen, we've been saying Christ is coming for the longest. I'm just going to live my life. That's the most dangerous place to be. Does that make sense what I'm trying to tell you? The Bible says already, he says he's coming, right? This is the interesting part. But he said he's coming when everybody gets to hear about Jesus. Does it make sense? So everybody's like, why is Christ not coming? Christ. We're supposed to be sharing the gospel so Christ can return, right? Because he wants us to actually be saved, right? He actually wants us to go to heaven with him. So you have to understand, because people also say that, oh man, I'm not gonna come to Christianity. It's all about fear. Oh, God wants us all to go to hell. That's why. I'm not gonna be under that pressure. I've heard so much. Listen, God does not want hell for anybody. I've never read that in the Bible at all. I don't know what word. Christ says that he's not going to come back unless you get a chance to hear about the word. He wants you to transform your life. He wants you to change. He's giving you a chance to fix certain areas of your life that's not good. Does that make sense what I'm saying? He's holding a mirror up to your face and saying, here, change this, change that. We have to be careful that we are not living a counterfeit life. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? We got to be very careful that we are the same person no matter where we go. My wife, she understands that the type of person that I gravitate to, she's like, man, how can this person? I gravitate towards people who are the same person no matter where we are. Right? We in church, you're the same person. We are here outside, you're the same person. You with your family, you're the same person. That's the type of people that I gravitate towards, right? I steer clear from people who seem to be different where we go. Does that make sense? Right? Because if you're someone who likes to dance and I'm in church with you, you should what? You should be a dancer in here. And then when we step out and I hear some music and I hear you dancing, it's not a shock to me. Does that make sense? Because you're a dancer. When you hear that beat, I'm like, oh, calm down, calm down. But then I'm over here in church and you're sitting here like you're a mouse in church. You're a mouse. And then I get out there, I'm like, hold on, who's this? Who's that person? Because this can't be the same. Huh? And we also have to be careful not to be that person neither. Does that make sense what I'm saying? We got to come through and analyze ourselves and make sure we're not that person that's that double, that counterfeit, that hey, I want to look like a wheat, but I'm really a, right? I want to present myself as a wheat, but I'm really a tare, and God cannot work with you when you're a chameleon. God can't work with you when you have these two masks on, right? And it says here, listen, you know, I was thinking about when I first prepared this message, it was talking about how much, it was going down a completely different route, but I'm bringing it circle here. And it talked about counterfeit, right? And I Googled how much counterfeit money is circulated in the United States. It says it's like $16 billion. It's like some crazy amount of money, like billions and billions of dollars that are in what they call circulation. Does that make sense? Which means that people can't even tell, like it's sitting in your wallet and you look at it and you cannot tell it's a counterfeit $100 or $10 bill, right? And I was sitting here like, man, when you have counterfeit money, unfortunately, this is where you have all kinds of results of other issues in your economy. Does that make sense? If other people who are economists, you would know that I don't, right? But if I was to compare this to spiritually, right? How many believers who are walking around counterfeit? And if we were truly real, real, what kind of transformation can happen in our families? Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because the economy having the counterfeit, now that results in inflation and results in all kinds of but having counterfeits amongst us, right? Having counterfeits amongst us in our houses, in our churches, in our family, all that, can you imagine if we just flip it and become real? Can you imagine what can happen in your household if we say, listen, we're going to take God seriously? Can you imagine what would happen in your life? Because you have to understand that when a lot of the times social media is giving us an image of ourselves, and then everybody can't line up to the image. That's why you hear so much depression. You don't hear that? You don't hear a lot of people are depressed more than ever? Because they turn it on and like, oh my gosh, look at her. She got a perfect husband, a perfect kids, perfect house. No. Stop fooling yourself. You turn on the video, you're like, oh, look at this. Oh my gosh, you with $100, you can buy 15 million trucks and you can start a business. And you're like, oh my gosh, look, for $100, I can do all of this. Guys, stop fooling ourselves. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Stop looking at that as our image because it will bring us to a point of discouragement. We will be very discouraged because we're looking at something that's not real as real. Does it make sense what I'm saying? You will live a life very discouraged. And as I close, there's a story. It's called a Cherokee legend, right? And the story goes like this. It says, an old Cherokee, is everybody listening? Good. It says, an old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. And he titles it, A Fight is Going On Inside of Me. Can anybody be a witness to that? It says, a fight is going on inside of me. And it says, it is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves, right? One is evil. He is angry. He's envious. He's sorrowful. He's full of regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilty, resentment. That was powerful for a second. Inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. So that's one wolf. Does that make sense? It says he continued, the other is good. He has joy. He has peace. He has love. He has hope. He has serenity. He has humility. He has kindness. He has benevolence. He has empathy. He has generosity. He has truthfulness. He has compassion. And he has faith. And there's a fight going on between them. And that same fight goes on between us inside. Does it make sense? Are y'all listening? And inside of every person, that same fight exists. I don't want anybody to think that you're better than anybody else. That's the one thing, too. You're not better than anybody else here. And it says the grandson thought about it for a minute. And then he asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? Does it make sense? Y'all still here with me? He says, which wolf will win? And it says the old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed. So we have to ask ourselves today, which one are we feeding? What are we feeding inside of us, right? Are we feeding that anger? Are we feeding that envy? Are we feeding that regret? Because some of us, we can really get deep in that zone. Does that make sense? Where people say, I'm just going to be that person. I'm going to be that angry, upset, self-pity, guilty, resentment. I'm going to live in that thing. I'm praying that's none of us in this room. But if it is, it's not too late, right? Because Christ, in the story, it says that he's going to wait for the harvest. Does that make sense? He's going to wait for the harvest. That means as long as you are still alive, you are still breathing, you can make a decision to transform everything about your life. Somebody's there. As long as you are still breathing, there's a chance. Somebody's preaching my message out there. As long as you are still breathing, there is an opportunity for change. Does that make sense? Come on now. That's the grace that Christ provides to all of us in this room. Many of us, we've been living in this arrogant, we don't need anybody, we good, we don't need God. Come on now. God says today, he's going to transform all that negative issues and problems that you have in your life, all that guilt, he's going to transform it to joy. He's going to transform it to peace. And I don't know about you guys, I would 10 times over want to live in peace, want to live in love, want to live in serenity, want to live in benevolence. I would love to live in that and around that 10 times over than I would want to live on the other side. And today, Christ is ready to grant it. He said he's ready to grant it. He says we have to consistently produce fruit if you are genuinely seeking Christ. You are in this world, but you are not of this world. So in other words, all the stuff that we see that this world got going on, God designed for us to live in it. But we don't have to indulge and be part of it. Does that make sense? And anytime you see yourself trying to indulge of the things of the world, check yourself. Check yourself. You know what I'm saying? We're going to end here, and I'm excited for the word that God gave us. Like usual, as we're singing this last song, right? I always see it as an opportunity for you to say, God, it's a moment for you to say, God, I want to transform something, right? Because if you wait, when you go home, you're in your car, you're distracted, the service is over, it's whatever, you know what I'm saying? But while you're in this atmosphere and the Holy Spirit is tugging on your heart, it's the time is now. The time for transformation is now. It's shifting now. So we're going to stand up. Amen. Let's give Jesus a hand clap. Let's give him a hand clap. And as we sing this last song, if you feel like God is talking to you, you step up. If you feel the Holy Spirit is talking to you, step up. I'm going to tell you right now, don't worry about nobody else. Don't worry, listen, because the life that you have to live is by yourself anyways. The encounter with Christ is by yourself. So if you're saying as we sing this last song that you want a transformation to happen, you step up. We have the pastors that are ready to pray for you. Amen? They're not going to ask, well, they may if you want to share it, a whole bunch of details. But they're going to say, Christ can transform you today. Today, something can change. And let's give Jesus a hand clap today.
All to Jesus.